Hi, my name is Jack Krasinski and I make videos on the internet. Sometimes. I'm a bit infrequent, but I do make more content on TikTok if you want a little bit more stupid in your life. I'm making this video to talk about one of my favorite film franchises of all time, the Scream movies. Recently, the fifth movie in the franchise hit theaters, and it was amazing. It was bloody, it was gruesome, it was another word to describe murder. It was also funny, intense, and all the stuff that these movies always are. But there was an interesting conversation that I saw on the internet after the movie's release that really got me thinking about the Scream franchise in general. Are the Scream movies horror? At first, that seems like a really dumb question. Obviously, the Scream movies are horror. That's what they're parodying. That's what the Scream movies use as their meta text. For the uninitiated, the Scream movies are different than other horror movies because the characters in the movie understand the tropes and rules of the horror movie genre. The best of them, 1, 4, and 5, actually have the killer using horror tropes to create a horror movie in the movie. It's a little bit complicated, but once you get into the franchise, it's absolutely amazing. So how could the Scream movies possibly not be horror? Well, there's one question you gotta ask yourself, and it's one that threw me for a loop when I heard it. Have you ever been scared by a Scream movie? Because even with the newest one, I don't think I have. I've definitely been on the edge of my seat, but fearful? You know, that thing that Joe Rogan used to do before he had terrible medical takes? No, I don't think I have been. To determine whether Scream is a horror movie, we have to define horror, which is harder than it sounds, because horror movies are divided into a lot of subgenres that you don't see in other genres of film like action or romance. There are tons of different types of horror movies that you can tell very easily apart from each other. So let's go over some of the prominent subgenres, that way we can decide whether Scream falls into any of them. I think the most well-known subgenre of horror movies are the slasher movies. The plot of these films normally involves some masked killer wielding some sort of melee weapon, attacking a group of teenagers for having sex and doing drugs and all sorts of other things I wasn't invited to do in high school. The rules of these movies are where Scream takes a lot of its meta content from. It is technically a slasher movie, so a lot of people would call it that. But others think that Scream lacks the gore and sheer terror of other slasher movies like Friday the 13th or Halloween. These are horror films where the main antagonist is some sort of unexplainable force. I think you can group together fantasy and sci-fi here, so it would include things like The Conjuring, The Exorcist, but also Alien and The Thing. There's still a lot of death and gore and terror in these movies, but a lot of times they're also joined with generally horrific imagery that isn't necessarily what you would expect. Let's move on to the next subgenre, gorer. Gorer. It's hard to say. These movies tend to focus more on grossing you out than thrilling you, but the best of them can do both at the same time. Examples of this would include the Saw franchise, or the Final Destination movies, or that video of a woman giving birth that you were forced to watch in middle school biology. The last subgenre that I think is significant is a relatively new one called elevated horror. Now, these movies share a lot of the tropes or even plot elements from the other subgenres, but they have one thing that the other ones don't: commentary. And I'm not talking about Cody Ko talking over a TikTok video. I'm talking about like political commentary or societal commentary. These movies like Midsommar, The Babadook, and It Follows have some message that they're trying to impart, where other horror movies tend to focus more on emotional value. Now, it's obvious that these subgenres aren't exclusive. Many films pick and choose from different subgenres to create a unique experience. But looking at them lets us create a list of rules that can help us determine whether Scream belongs in the horror franchise at all. So here are the rules that I think are most important for a horror movie. Number 1, horror movies need to have some sort of physical antagonist. The characters need to be in imminent danger of dying throughout the movie. Scream has this in the ghost-faced killers that haunt the cast in every single movie. Number 2, horror movies need death, so therefore they also need a pretty large cast so that there is some fat to cut. Once again, Scream achieves this with some of the most brutal kills you'll ever see. Number 3, horror movies need someone who's likable, someone that we're gonna root for to survive, otherwise it's not really scary if we don't give a fuck who dies. The Scream movies have Sidney Prescott and Dewey Riley, who serve as some of the most likable protagonists you'll ever see in a horror movie, so they got that too. And number 4, and obviously most importantly, but also the hardest to determine, horror movies need to be scary. But where do you draw the line between thrilling and scary? That's the question. So we basically did all of that for nothing. But it was fun to talk about, right? When does a thriller become a horror movie? I don't know if it's something that we can define, but it's definitely something you can feel. You see, in thrillers, the characters are always in some form of danger. Movies like James Bond can be considered thrillers along with action movies. In those movies, the characters are in imminent danger of death, but they're not horror movies, so what's different? I think I know what's different. I think it has to do with the goals of the antagonist and the protagonist. In thrillers, the antagonist normally has some goal outside of just killing the protagonists, where in horror movies, the villain normally just wants to brutally murder the main characters. They either get whatever they want by killing them or mysteriously have no motive and just want to murder for the fun of it. This makes the film feel more claustrophobic because there's nothing to distract the villain. All they want, their only focus, is murdering the character that we care about. Let's take a look back at Scream. In every movie, Ghostface just wants to kill Sidney Prescott, or in the most recent one, Sam. Sometimes they have some reason for this, but the only way they get what they want is by killing them, therefore fulfilling this need. But what do the goals of the protagonist have to do with this? In horror movies, the main characters are normally just trying to stay alive, whereas in thrillers, they normally have something to stop. Stop the bomb, save the president, save Garfield the cat. That would be important to me. But a horror protagonist is just trying to see the light of day again. It has the same effect as the goal for the villain. It makes the film more claustrophobic. Only one avenue to go down. All you have to do is survive, which for some reason is scarier than them having to do something else and survive. Scream once again achieves this. Sidney and the gang most of the time are just trying to survive the rampage of Ghostface, even if sometimes they are trying to unmask him or her or them. There's always two. Sorry if I'm spoiling that, but if you got this far into the video and you haven't seen the Scream movies, good for you. Go watch them. They're really good. So, I think I've concluded that Scream is a horror franchise, specifically an elevated horror comedy franchise. But if you're still not convinced, I have one more point to make. I think the weapon of the antagonist also has a lot to do with whether a film is horror or not. In most thrillers, you'll see the bad guy using a gun, because just quick and easy, that's all they want. Kill them, that's done. But with horror movies, the villains are always using a bat or a chainsaw, or in Scream, a knife. Something that's going to hurt more. I think the threat of a knife, for whatever reason, is more horrifying than the threat of a gun, because a gun's just going to end you and you're done. But a knife is going to make you sit there with your guts hanging out. And I think that changes something. I think that adds horror. So even though Scream doesn't necessarily scare me, I think it is horror. I think it fits everything necessary for it to be a horror franchise. So there's that. Yeah, Scream's horror. Fuck you if you think differently.